In the traditional Navajo culture, the leadership was decentralized and organized around clans and kins of a family. Children were born into the mother's family and gained social status there. The mother's most elderly brother traditionally has a strong influence on rearing the children. The clan's leadership, Natani, or headmen, have served as a de facto government on the local level of the Navajo Nation. However, this was changed in the 1920s when people discovered valuable oil resources of the Navajo land. For example, in September 1922, the Midwest Refining Company hit a gusher, which produced about 300 barrels per day of some of the highest quality oil in the United States at that time. At the same time, the Secretary of Interior, Albert Bacon Fall, a New Mexican rancher and a friend of the oil industry, saw that the Navajo decentralized government can prevent him from opening the West up for development and proliferating financially. As a result, Fall lobbied the federal government to create a Navajo Business Council and to sign off on leases on tribal lands. All three appointees of the council were Navajo natives, but with strong links to the white business community, Fall or both. This action resulted in much criticism in the Navajo Nation, with the Kansas City Stars reporting in February 1923 a story titled "Navajo Indians Almost on Warpath as a Result of New Rulings." It states, Navajos have governed themselves ever since the Treaty of Peace with the whites was signed in 1868 as a pure democracy. Every male of the age of 18 and upward was entitled to voice his sentiments in the council of the tribe. Thus, the government had become an absolute equal suffrage democracy. Oil leases were voted on by the councils on such terms as the councils determined, and no one, not even the Secretary of the Interior himself, had the power to alter those terms. Under such criticism, Bureau of Indian Affairs Commissioner Charles H. Buck instead helped Fall to establish a representative Navajo Tribal Council, with delegates from each agency. Eventually, a tribal council of 20 delegates was elected, but under industry-friendly pressure, gave up all their oil and gas leasing negotiating power to a white special commissioner named Herbert Hagerman. As a result, the Navajo town of Shiprock was in the middle of all these oil boom, but never reaped any of its benefit. In 1934, Congress passed the Indian Reorganization Act, which gives the tribes more self-governing rights. The tribes eliminated its ties with the special commissioner, but kept the centralized government. While it was created for a questionable cause, it ultimately paved the way for self-governance. But the government structure wasn't clear without a clearly codified constitution. Fast forward to 1989, the Navajo people were particularly wary of the excessive executive power given to the tribal chairman, and especially the chairman at that time, Peter MacDonald. He was often referred to as the most powerful Indian in the USA, with much corruption and accusations of kickback schemes like selling a ranch to the Navajo Nation at a $7.2 million profit. When the tribal council put him on administrative leave, he refused to step down and led a riot against the government that eventually resulted in 2 of his supporters killed. The tribal council eventually put him in jail and initiated a series of government structure reforms named the Title II Amendments. They aimed to separate the powers of the legislative tribal council, the president, and the Supreme Court, with a checks and balances system to prevent power abuses similar to that of the U.S. Constitution. These governments resulted in the Navajo government that we see today.
The legislative branch, or the Navajo Nation Council, consists of 24 delegates from 110 chapters elected every 4 years by registered Navajo voters. Delegates must be members of the Navajo Nation and be at least 25 years of age. The council meets 4 times a year with additional special sessions at the Navajo Nation Council Chamber. Similar to the U.S. House of Representatives, the council selects a speaker among all delegates to preside over the day-to-day functions of the council, but for a 2-year term. Current speaker is Seth Damon. The Navajo Nation does not have a formal constitution, but they have an uncodified constitution, which means that often customs, precedents, a variety of statutes, and legal instruments all create rules by which the nation abides. One such document is the Navajo Nation Code that collects all laws and statutes enacted through resolutions of the Navajo Nation Council. Presently, it has 26 titles. Interestingly, the very first article of the Codes states that the Congress has the power to abolish Native Indian self-governance. Executive branch. Every 4 years, the people of the Navajo Nation elect a president who makes sure people follow the laws and who may serve not more than 2 consecutive terms. There is also a vice president to help the president and to take over if the president can no longer serve. The president works in Window Rock, Arizona, the capital of the Navajo Nation. In the 2014 Navajo presidential election, which also requires the president to be fluent in the Navajo language, one of the primary frontrunners, Chris Duchenne, was forced off the ballot by the Navajo Supreme Court because he was not fluent in Navajo language. While more debates emerged in the council to eliminate the language requirement, Duchenne chose to suspend his campaign. Presently, the fluency is to be determined by the Navajo voters when they cast ballots. The Navajo Nation's current president is Jonathan Nez, and he is the 9th president since 1991. Before his presidency, he served 1 term as a vice president. Being 43, he's also the youngest Navajo president. He won by a 33% margin from the next candidate, and during the campaign, Nez endorsed the legalization of same-sex marriage in the Navajo Nation. His presidency also came in time of the COVID-19 pandemic, and Nez has been leading the efforts to minimize its influence on Native Indians' lives. At the very beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, they were hit hardest by the illness and had the highest deaths and positive cases rates in all of America. But now, it's one of the safest places. As of January 2022, 72% of eligible citizens were vaccinated. Judiciary branch. Before the forceful deportations of the Navajo people, all judicial processes were done by peace chiefs in a meditation-style process. Lesser crimes and disputes remained in hands of the village chiefs. After the Navajo returned from reservation in 1868, listed criminal offenses were handled by the U.S. Indian Agent of the Bureau of Indian Affairs with support of the U.S. Army, and lesser conflicts remained under Navajo control. In 1892, BIA agent David Shipley established the Navajo Court of Indian Offenses and appointed judges. The current judicial system for the Navajo Nation became effective in 1959 after the Navajo Tribal Council established a separate judicial branch of government with trial courts of the Navajo tribe and the Navajo Tribal Court of Appeals. In December 1985, the Navajo Tribal Council passed the Judicial Reform Act that defined the Navajo Nation Supreme Court and district courts of the Navajo Nation that span over 10 districts. The Navajo Nation Supreme Court has only 3 members: Chief Justice Juan Jane and Associate Justices Eleanor Shirley and Tina Tsingi. Looking back on the evolution of the Navajo government, it has transformed a lot, whether against their wills or not. From the family-based, decentralized system to a more westernized democracy with a rich structure that includes many various departments and chapters.